Welcome to Charts Today. It's Friday, the 8th of May, and it's election results day in the UK. So the markets in the UK are not taking it all in their stride. On sterling, we're still waiting to see on the medium term chart which way we break. If we look at the UK stock market, we're seeing that's down this morning about 1%. You can see here just falling away. There's quite big results for Reform in the UK, which is the sort of challenger party to the Conservatives, if you like. And we're seeing gilts sitting fairly steady. That's the 60-minute chart. But if you look at the daily chart, we pulled back from that 511 area, so 5.11, we're back below 5. So really the market's taking it in its stride. But if we look at some of the currencies, of course, the dollar index still waiting to see which way we break. The euro, again, in a sideways range there. The Japanese yen, we have seen intervention more recently. So that 160 level is very critical for the yen. And again, the bond yield in Japan is holding up, still looking pretty bullish. And of course, on the short-term chart, we've now got that target to 270. So 2.7% is worrying for Japan, the most indebted nation in the world in terms of GDP, debt to GDP ratio of 250%. Looking at the US market for treasury yields, that's also just sitting steady. This 4.5% there, so that's quite key. And looking in, if we look in Germany, still the bond yield chart there is concerning with those upside targets, but what we'd give in the UK for 3% rates. So Germany's still lower, and Italy around 4. Australia sitting similar to the UK at around 5, but the Aussie currency, we have given a new upside target there, and that does look stronger, and that's good, certainly good for my Australian holdings. 20% potential upside there against the dollar, and that shows up if we look at the sterling rate for the Aussie dollar. Again, this is how much it costs in Aussie dollars to buy sterling, and that's fallen from as high as 215 down to 187. So really quite key there. Bitcoin just pulling back a little bit, but through the cloud now, both on the trend and the lagging line. So we are discounting this downside target. That downside target not reached is bullish confirmation, remember. And if we look at the markets in the US, we are up slightly today. They're holding up stronger. The Nasdaq up 0.5% on the future. Look at that move, just incredible there. And so it is going to that target, despite wandering away from the target. As I mentioned, the UK market lower, the DAX in Germany, the future down 1% as well, but we have got a new upside target there. We talked about German stocks yesterday. Looking at Asian markets, mostly down. So the Hang Seng down nearly 1%. The Sensex in India really retreating back, having had that big fall in the Middle East crisis, really retreating back and falling. And if we look at the Aussie market, down 1.5%, so not great there. And so that is really bucking the trend against the US market. So we're seeing US markets coming back into the fall. Brent crude is up 1%. That range is really tightening on Brent crude now. Is somewhere between sort of 96 and 104. That's the range we've given this morning in our morning report for Brent crude. And if we look at gold, that's up 0.5%. This is really starting to look like a proper recovery. We've got the low, the high, the higher low. Now we just need a higher high. A move above 48, well, 4,900 would be that, but 5,000 is a pretty critical number for gold. And if we look at silver, that also looking like and just nudging that higher high. So really big run that we saw last year, the fallback then gaining back again. So really quite interesting there. Looking at the tech stocks, we had Google up slightly, Microsoft just waiting to see if we activate that upside target. Nvidia, again, we're waiting to see if we activate that upside target. We can look at the 60-minute chart for a heads up on that. No clear heads up. And sometimes you can see with a 60-minute, are you going to activate? We have got a new activated upside target for Tesla. So that's quite interesting. Looking at the long-term chart for Tesla, there are some big upside targets, but those are into 2027, 2028. So that's really quite interesting on the weekly chart. But we have activated that upside target. We're not above the cloud yet on the lagging line, though. So watch that 60-minute chart for Tesla for signs of any new downside targets. That's the way to read these. Looking at the Dow, we had more down than up yesterday. That was quite key. Apple just struggling to make that new high. Just did nudge it for a while there yesterday, but fell back to close below that November level. So despite the stellar results from Apple last week, we still haven't managed that. The NASDAQ, we saw some really big moves yesterday. Datadog up 31%. So we're seeing huge moves here. Fortnite up 23%. 20%. Axon up 10%. Zayla 10%. So you can see these massive moves, but it's all about moves in the trend. So here we see Ensamed 23% downside. You had that target beforehand. You had that target last week. You had that on 22nd of April, and then it's met really, really quickly. So you can't ignore these targets when you see them. You see how downside target given there, downside target. So this is a way of avoiding those big moves. 10% in the scheme of what's going on with ARM is not so big. So you've got to put these moves into context. And then last of all, we'll take a look at the UK market. More red than green today. Only a handful of stocks up. So that's really quite key. Interestingly, a new upside target there on BT, and we're above the cloud, and we're breaking to new highs. So that's significant. JD Sports, not so significant. Big move today, but downside target and met and below the cloud. Intercontinental Hotel Group it has held up pretty well, and BP, of course, a riser there. But most of the UK market is down. So we are, and of course we are heading into May, and you know the classic saying, sell in May and go away and come back at Labor Day. Does it work? Not reliably, but it is a saying. Anyway, that's it for today. Until Monday, have a great weekend. Happy charting. Bye for now.